I always wanted to share this story with your community, because the story I've shared back in our community, and it doesn't have the same impact. When I was a rabbi in Maryland, you've heard this story before. When I was a rabbi in Maryland, I used to have a rabbi's discretionary fund, and people would come to ask for tzedakah on a regular basis. I would have many people on several people a day that would come ask for tzedakah. And some of them really try to talk to you a lot and make a pitch, and others are, just ask for their money and go. So there was one particular guy, I believe he was Israeli, and he was trying to, I guess, make small talk with me, so he kept talking about how great the Syrian community was. He knew I was from New York. He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "New York." He said, "Oh, the Syrian community, they're so great. They're so wonderful. They love the Torah. They love the mitzvot. They're so great. They're so great." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. Yes. I have many connections there, but, I'm not actually Syrian." But he didn't know that. He kept going on and on. "Oh, they're so great. They're so great." I kept saying, "Absolutely, you're right. I gave him a check. We're about to leave. He's walking out the door. He says, "By the way, what Syrian background are you? What city are you from?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm not Syrian. I'm Persian." He said, "Oh, you're Persian. I have a brother-in-law that's Persian. I have a rabbi that's Persian. I have a chavruta that's Persian and this Persian." And then I said, "That's very nice." He said, "Can I have more money now?" So that was just a story I thought you would appreciate, because of the praise, that the community has from Arba Kanfot Haaretz. So I got invited to speak about probably the most difficult book of Tanakh, and one of the most difficult sections of it, which is chapters 7 through 13. And the question was, what do I have to say about this particular part of the book of Ishayah? In general, the book of Ishayah is a challenge because it doesn't offer us the benefit of an easy storyline to follow, which is one of the strong suits of the first several books of Tanakh that we learn when we do the Nach Yomi. We have the benefit of a very, very engaging storyline with characters that are developed beautifully and lots of drama. You come to the book of Yeshayahu, and suddenly you no longer have the benefit of that narrative. And on the other hand, you have the challenge of extremely difficult Hebrew, poetic Hebrew. It's almost like Shakespearean version of Hebrew. Plus, half the time we have no idea what the Navi is talking about, which can be particularly challenging. We don't know, is he predicting Yemot HaMashiach? Is he talking about right now? Is he addressing a situation that was contemporary, that was a few years ahead, that was thousands of years ahead? We don't always know. So the number of interpretations, I wouldn't say is boundless, but it's a lot more fluid. The interpretation's a lot more fluid, a lot broader than in many of the other books of Tanakh. So I was thinking to myself, what can I do with 6 chapters of Sefer Yeshayahu, each of which doesn't necessarily connect to in a direct way to the one after. They're somewhat different subjects developing here. What can we do with the book, and how can I address it? So I wanted to look first of all at something specific towards the beginning of this section in chapter 7. And then what I'd like to do is look at some broad themes that I think we can kind of develop out of this particular. Now, in the beginning of chapter 7, Perek Zayin, what we have is we're introduced to Ahaz. Now, we're actually not introduced to him because since we've all been doing Nach Yomi for a long time, we know who Ahaz is. Ahaz was one of the bad kings, if you will, of Yehuda. He was one of the ones who was less than stellar. His father was one of the better kings of Yehuda. Not the best, but one of the better. But Ahaz was one that kind of took things in a totally different direction. As you may recall from Sefer Melachim, he was the one that decided to seek protection from Ashur, from Assyria. And in his seeking of protection, he went above and beyond what was necessary. He didn't just say, "I'll pay taxes to you, give me protection, defend me from my enemies." He said, I am your servant and I am your child. I'm going to become an Assyrian. I'm going to transform the culture of my kingdom into a mini Assyria, mini Ashur. He went above and beyond what was expected. None of the other countries that surrendered to Ashur decided to give up their religion, change their culture. But Ahaz felt that that was the best road to win the heart of the king of Ashur. And so that's what he did, as we read in Sefer Melachim. Now, in this chapter of Ishayah, we get a little bit of an insight into what was going on that precipitated this move by Ahaz. Ahaz was in a difficult position, and we can relate to him, and we shouldn't try to look at the kings and say, these guys were crazy, these guys were anti-Semitic, they hated the Torah, they hated Judaism. It's not so simple. You need to look at their circumstances fairly, and we can even envision somebody like Ahaz living today. What was the concern? The concern was he had two other kingdoms on his back. The two kingdoms on his back were Aram and Yisrael. We know to the north of the smaller kingdom of Yehudah is the bigger and much more powerful kingdom of Yisrael. They were teaming up with Aram at the time in order to fight against Ashur. Ashur was establishing its empire, extending its empire, and had its sights set on Israel and the surrounding area. And so there were only two possibilities. What are the two possibilities? If you can't beat him, join him, right? That's possibility number one, and that's what Ahaz wanted to do. He said, no, don't attack me. I want to be your ally. I want to work for you. I'm your friend. That's one possibility. The other possibility is join with a bunch of other kingdoms and maybe stand up to the mighty army of Ashur. It's a long shot, maybe. Ashur was extremely powerful, extraordinarily powerful, but there was hope. We could stand up, we could retain our autonomy, our independence, and then there was a third possibility, which is don't do anything. Now that sounds like the scariest possibility. You could imagine that if there were some kind of kingdom, some kind of nation threatening, let's say, the United States of America, and the government decided, you know what, we're just going to do nothing, we're just going to sit here, I don't think anything's going to happen, we would be considered crazy. Now, sometimes what the United States has done is reached out to other nations to form a coalition to fight a perceived, real or perceived enemy. Other times it does it on its own. Alliances shift all the time on the international scene. Ahaz is making a political calculation. The kingdom of Israel and Aram want him on their side against Ashur. They said, let's make a block against Ashur. Ahaz says, this is not going to work. There's no way these guys are going to be able to stand up against Ashur. I'm going to reach out to Ashur and be kind of like an inside, behind their back. I'm going to form an alliance with Ashur and go against them, go around them. They didn't like that. So they wanted to fight against Ahaz, take over Malchut Yehudah, put a puppet king in place that agreed with them, an anti-Assyrian king, and make their own coalition. So you can imagine Ahaz is in a very difficult position. He might not have been the greatest king, but he also wasn't dealt the easiest hand. Okay? He's got a conflict with this huge empire that's steamrolling every nation in its path, and it's on the way to Israel. He's got his two neighbors, Aram and Yisrael, who also want him out because they want to form a coalition against Ashur. He thinks the best thing is to form a coalition with Ashur, be friends with Ashur, with the big bully on the block. Don't be the enemy. It's very complicated. And what does Shayahu come and do? Shayahu comes and says, don't do anything. Don't do anything. He's got two factions. We can imagine. He has two factions, right? Any politician, any leader is going to have two factions. He's got the pro-Assyrian faction telling him, listen, Ahaz, you have to form an alliance with Ashur before they come here. We're going to be dead meat. You got to do something. Others are saying, no, stand up, the nationalists, the patriots. They say, no, form an alliance with Aram and Yisrael. We're going to fight Ashur. You can imagine. You could see it here. It would happen here. It would happen in Israel. Right? Should we listen to whatever America says so they'll defend us from our enemies? Should we stand up on our own principles? These things happen all the time. Nobody has suggested that we become allies with Iran. Right? That's not one of the possibilities. But if it were, you could bet there would probably be people who would say, yeah, that's what we should do. So Ahaz is in a tough position. He chooses one of the paths. But what's very interesting with that perspective, sort of that background, is Ishayah comes to Ahaz. And again, we can feel for Ahaz, and you should feel for him. You should have a sense, you should identify with the plight that he's in. It's not simple. He's got people breathing down his neck from all sides, and he's got a lot of pressure on him to make a decision for the sake of his kingdom. And Ishayah comes, and he says, don't be afraid of these two guys. Okay, this is in Perek Zayin, Pasuk Dalet. Ve'amartai lav, this is what Hashem tells Ishayah to tell Ahaz. Hishamer v'ashket. Stay and be quiet. Al tira, don't be afraid. Ulevavachal yerach, and don't let your heart be soft. From these two, misheneh zanvot ha'udim ha'ashenim ha'eleh, these two smoking sticks. They're nothing. Aram and Yisrael, they're not going to do anything to you. Okay, so, of course, easier said than done, right? That's very easy to say, oh, don't worry about it. There are two kingdoms threatening you that they want to overthrow you, but they're not going to do anything. Don't worry. Says who? Says the Navi. But that assumes that I believe the Navi. So what does, and again, Yeshayahu says, Ko amar Hashem Elohim, lo takum velo tihiyeh. It will not be. They are not going to take over Malchut Yehudah. They are not going to attack. They are not going to succeed. They're going to be gone before they ever have a chance to lift a finger against you. And then, in Pasuk Yud, we have one of the most famous passages in Ishayah, not thanks to our religion, by the way, thanks to another religion. This passage became very famous. What happens? Vayosef Hashem daber Ahaz lemor, she'al lecha ot me'im Hashem Elohecha, ask for a sign from Hashem your God. Hamek she'ala, ask for something below, o hagbe'a lemala, or something above, meaning ask me for a sign. Now who else, does anybody happen to remember, who else did Yeshayahu ask, do you want a sign? Or actually who asked for a sign from Yeshayahu? Chizkiyahu. But Chizkiyahu was a good king, he believed, right? So he asked, I want a sign that I'm going to get better. When he was sick. What does Ahaz say? Ahaz says something very funny. He sounds very, very religious. Vayomer Ahaz, lo eshal velo anaseh et Hashem. God forbid that I should test Hashem. He sounds very religious. Really, he's saying, don't bother. Right? He's saying, don't bother. He's not being so religious. What does Yeshayahu say? Oh, he says, since you refuse to accept the sign, this is Pasuk Yudalid. Lachen yiten Hashem hu lachem ot. Hashem is going to give you a sign anyway. And this is the very famous passage. Hinei ha'alma hara. The woman is pregnant, or will become pregnant. Depends on which one of the Perushim you take. V'yoledet ben, and she's going to have a child. The karat shemo Immanuel. And either it means you will call his name Immanuel, or it means she will call his name. It's one of the difficulties with tiktuk. We can't tell which one exactly it means. But what's the point? Chem'ah udvash yochel. He's going to eat he's going to eat cream and honey, meaning he's going to live a charmed life, a luxurious life. From the time that he's able to tell the difference between what's good and what's bad. Because before this child has a chance to know what the difference is between good and bad, this land is going to be empty of these kingdoms that are threatening you. In other words, things are going to be better. Right now, things are terrible. By the way, if you know the background, you know that Aram had already basically taken the entire eastern side of Israel, parts that had previously been controlled by Yehudah. There was already inroads being made into the kingdom of Yehudah. They were shrinking because of these two kingdoms. So they had reason to believe these two kingdoms can just completely take us over. Just like Canada might have been afraid, that America was originally going to, when it bought Alaska, they thought, oh, they're coming for us next. These American imperialists are going to take over Canada. So the same way, they felt that they were coming after them. Now, what is Yeshayahu saying? He's saying that a woman is going to have a child. Now, we know this is something in another very popular religion in America. They believe that this is a reference to a woman who's going to have a child, and this child is going to be the Mashiach and all that. That's why this pasuk became famous. Okay? Now, it has absolutely nothing to do with the Mashiach. It has absolutely nothing to do with virgins having children. It doesn't say anything about virgins in the pasuk. So it's a non sequitur. It has nothing to do with the text itself, but it became a very famous passage because of that. I have a more basic question, which is, what is the purpose of a sign? Why does a Navi give a sign? To prove something ahead of time, right? Isn't that like if Chizkiyahu asks for a sign, he says, I'm sick right now, you're telling me I'm going to get better, show me a sign that that's really true. Right? Because I don't trust, or I don't have complete faith, I don't have complete emunah on what you're telling me. I want some kind of evidence that God is really speaking here, and this is not just what you're promising me to make me feel better. Remember, when when Elisha tells Ben-Hadad, right? When Elisha is asked, is Ben-Hadad going to live? You all should know your Sefer Malachim, Baal Peh perfectly. When he asks him, what does Elisha say? Tell him he's going to live, but actually he's going to die. Right? So maybe Chizkiyahu said, listen, I don't know what you're telling me. Is it true, or are you just telling me to make me feel better? Or are you telling me the truth? So he asked for a sign. But this sign is a very difficult sign to understand. First of all, the king said, I don't want a sign. So Ishayah says, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. A girl is going to have a child, and his name is going to be Emmanuel. So how's that a sign? That's a miracle that a woman has a child. Women have children every day. Have you ever been to the maternity ward? Women are having children every day. Baruch Hashem. It's a good thing. Sometimes multiple ones at once. And what they name them could be any number of things. So what is a sign that a girl is going to have a baby? Now, and plus, we don't know who this girl is. You're telling me, okay, in the entire population of Israel, there's going to be one girl who's going to have a baby. It's going to be named Emmanuel. That's supposed to be a sign. A sign of what? What are the chances of that? Statistically, it's possible. But is that a miracle that somebody named their child Emmanuel? It's not a miracle. It's one name of many. So some say this is talking about Ishayahu's own wife is going to have a baby, because we see that later she has babies and he names his children like Sha'ar Yashuv and Maher Shal Chashbaz. He names them after prophetic predictions, right? So some say that this is his own wife. How is it a miracle that my wife is going to name this child a certain name? So how does that prove anything? And once the word gets out that this prophecy has been made that a child's going to be called Emmanuel, everyone's going to pick the name, or maybe nobody will pick the name. It's going to contaminate the test results. I mean, what kind of evidence is this? It's not really a good sign. And you're telling me that in 2 years or 3 years he's going to eat cream and honey. How does that help me now? I'm trying to decide what to do right now. You're giving me a sign so that I feel confident that Aram and Yisrael are not going to attack me by telling me about a baby he's going to be born and in a few years he's going to eat honey and cream. How does that help me now? It's a very strange kind of sign. But this seems to be something that Ishayahu does a lot, because if you look forward, he also, and then he goes on to predict, of course, that things are going to be so good that there's going to be honey and cream. And then in the next parak in Chet, it says to us that you should take a Gillayon Gadol. Now, some people say that a Gillayon Gadol is some kind of a scroll. Some people say that it's referring to some kind of a luach, some kind of a board that they would write on. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's some kind of writing surface. And to write on it, Maher Shalal Chashbaz, which means, come quickly, and to the plunder, come to the spoils quickly. And that's referring to what? Ashur is going to be coming very quickly and picking up everything, meaning that this coalition of Israel and Aram is not going to last, because very soon Ashur is going to come and sweep. Actually, first they're going to sweep out Aram, and then years later they're going to come and sweep out Yisrael. It's going to be, there are years in between, but still, the point is that the main ally is Aram, and they're not going to be worth anything. So then it says that he has a baby, and he names his baby Maher Shalal Chashbaz, longest name in the Tanakh. Trivia. Anybody ever asks you what's the longest name in the Bible? That's it? It's a 4-word name. The Radak said it wasn't really his name. Nobody would call a child such a long name. Did you ever read the book Tiki Tiki Tembo? Tiki Tiki Tembo, no, Rambo, Chari Ruchi Piperi Pembo has fallen into the well, It's too long of a name, okay? That name is too long. So he says that was maybe they sometimes use the first half of it, sometimes the second half, not all 4 of the names. Okay, it doesn't matter. This is a long name. Now, according to Rashi, this is the same baby as Emmanuel. That it represents 2 different ideas. One is the idea that the army of Ashur is going to come in and is going to wipe everything out very soon. And the other one is Emmanuel, but God is going to be with us in Yehuda. We're going to be okay. So it's the same child. However, most of the Mefarshim don't interpret it that way. They think that that these are 2 different children. Either way, again, what is the point of naming your children after these weird things? What is this supposed to mean? How does this accomplish anything? And then you see that a bit later, Yishayahu refers to this idea. He says in Pasuk Tet Zayin, Tet really... it's Tet Zayin, yeah. So, v'chikiti l'Hashem, hamastir panav mibet Yaakov, v'kiveti lo, hine anochi v'ayeladim asher natan li Hashem, leotot ulemofetim b'Yisrael, me'im Hashem tzevaot, hashochein ba'aretz Zion. I and my children that Hashem has given me as signs and wonders in Israel. Why is it so wonderful that you named your child a certain name? It's very strange. What is it with the names? And writing things on big paper, or big Luach, what is that accomplishing? So I think what we have to understand here is something very, very important about Yeshayahu. And this is what makes Yeshayahu unique. But in order to understand this, I have to violate protocol and go back to Perek Vav that I wasn't supposed to talk about. Because in Perek Vav, Yeshayahu is informed of the fact that his mission is really, I don't want to say a waste of time, God forbid it's not a waste of time, but his mission is going to be a unique mission. His mission is going to be not being heard by his generation. That's what when he comes into the great vision of the divine throne room with all of the angels all about, that we read about in Perek Vav, and it's very, very famous. It's one of the haftarot of the year. And the angel touches his lips with the coals, and he receives the message. Hashem says to him, and this is in Perek Vav, Pasuk Tet, Vayomer lech v'amarta la'am hazeh, shim'u shamo'a v'al tavinu, ur'u ra'o v'al teda'u. You're going to hear and not understand. You're going to see and you're not going to know. Hashmin lev'am hazeh. This nation is going to have a fat heart. That doesn't mean that it's going to have a lot of cholesterol. It means it's not going to understand. V'oznav achbed ve'enav hasha. So all of its senses are going to be sealed up. Pen yir'eh ve'enav uv'oznav yishma ulvavo yavin v'shav v'rafalo. That it's not going to receive the prophetic message. You're going to be speaking to, like the story about the couple that, the husband takes his wife to the kotel, right? Before they get married. I told you the story. They go to the kotel. But the night before their wedding, they go to the kotel, and he says he wants to bring his wife to the kotel. It's very important. Well, no, there's too many things going on. No, we have to go to the kotel. We have to go to the kotel. They go to the kotel, and this says, okay, now I'm okay. Why did you have to take your wife to the kotel before you got married? He said, because I wanted her to get used to talking to a wall. So what does Hashem say? What does Hashem say to Yeshayahu? You're going to be talking to a wall. Nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to respond. Nobody's going to receive. They're going to ignore you. So Yeshayahu must be thinking to himself, well, what's the point then of going out there and putting myself out there and proclaiming this message if I know that they're not going to listen to me? And Hashem has already decided they're not going to listen to me. What's the point then? The point can only be, and I have to tell you that I have every one of the Mefarshim comes up with a different way of explaining how these children could possibly be signs. What is the sign? The fact that somebody got pregnant, that's not really that amazing. The fact that somebody used a certain name, that's not amazing either. How is it supposed to be a sign? So I have a suggestion. My thought is that the way that it works is this, and it fits in with the theme of Yeshayahu in general, which is that Yeshayahu is a Navi for whom the immediate audience is not the real audience. Okay? The immediate audience is not the real audience because that audience was, so to speak, a lost cause. He knew it was a lost cause. What does he have to prove? He has to prove to the next generation. He has to be able to say, I knew this was coming. I knew this was coming. What's the proof? Look, my child or your child or whoever, Immanuel, remember when he was born? He was born in the worst time. And now look at what a beautiful life he's living. Because Immanuel, in other words, somebody who sees that child growing up will say, we remember when he was born, what a ridiculous thing to call him Immanuel when everything was so bad. And now he's living in the lap of luxury. In other words, all of the prophecies of Yeshayahu are meant for after the fact, for people to say, wow, he was right all along. Nivu'ah has to reestablish itself. Prophecy has to reestablish itself as a reliable source of knowledge for the people. Where do you see that it isn't? Because Ahaz says, I don't care. I'm not interested. I don't want a sign. I'm not going to test God. This is not for me. So Yeshayahu says, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. Why would you give a sign to somebody who doesn't want a sign? Why would you give somebody a sign that doesn't want to listen to it? Because it's not for him. It's really not for him. It's really for the next generation. So that they can say, Immanuel, we remember when he was born. And look, Immanuel, God is with us. See, that's my theory of Yeshayahu. And this explains one of the psukim. Tzor te'udah. Seal up the witness. Chatom Torah belimudai. Seal the Torah with the people who are the students. In other words, the small group of people who actually paid attention and cared about what Ishayah had to say, they will have this as te'udah, as a witness, as documented evidence that nivu'ah is a real thing. So instead of prophecy being for right now, because this generation is not receptive, Yeshayahu's prophecy is for the purpose of reestablishing that prophecy is legitimate in Yehudah, after a period of Ahaz during which it was neglected and rejected. Okay? Now, where do you see that? Why is it that they don't want to listen to Yeshayahu? Why is it that they will go after psychics? They'll go after all of this communication with the dead, mediums, anything but listen to Yeshayahu? Right? He says these people are going to go after all kinds of occult methods. They'll seek after every occult method to try to get knowledge of the future, but they don't want to listen to me. Why is it that Yeshayahu, why is it that the people will be so willing to do that but not listen to Yeshayahu? What's the reason? Why don't they like Yeshayahu? Why do they like going and listening to psychics and listening to all of these crystal ball people? Why is that any better? They like the message. They like the content, because the content, if you go for, I've never, Baruch Hashem, never gone to any psychic or anything like that. But I'm pretty sure when you go in, they don't tell you, you're doing the wrong thing, you're unethical, you're immoral, because they want to get their money. You're not going to get customers if you do that. They tell you, oh, you're in for this is going to happen to you, this is going to happen, this is what's going to happen next. And let's face it, if the kingdom is destroyed, what are you going to do? Ask for a refund? It's too late. The people will go to these psychics and these mediums because they offer a product that's very pleasant. They don't want to listen to Ishayah, because Ishayah says it's your fault that things are bad. It's your fault. It's because of the choices you're making in the unethical, immoral society that you're living in. That's the reason. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to be accountable. Look at our society. Anytime a politician gets up and criticizes a group of people and says it's their fault that something has happened to them, oy vavoy. Their career is over. The career is over. Why? Because you're not allowed to say that. You have to blame it on somebody else. You can't give somebody responsibility, expect somebody to take responsibility for their own suffering or for the consequences of their own actions. It's an extremely unpopular thing to do, and Yeshayahu does it all the time. So nobody wants to hear that. So Yeshayahu says, I'm going to seal this up. I'm going to have these children, and in the future, people are going to see these children. They're going to see this document and say, wow, Nivu'ah really works. This is really the way to go. Ahaz was wrong. And look what happens in the time of Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu, who follows Ahaz, is very much a listener to the Navi. Oh, he makes his mistakes. He's not perfect. Nobody is perfect in the Tanakh, but except for Hashem. None of the people are perfect, right? So, but he is very receptive to the message of the Navi. So you see that Yeshayahu's mission succeeded. The next generation did heed the Nevi'im. They saw what happened. They recognized that Nivu'ah was true and was reliable, and they went after it. And that's the greatness, that's the uniqueness and the greatness of Yeshayahu. Now, by the way, is there any precedent for this? Is there any precedent for a Navi saying, I'm giving you this message, you're not going to listen to it, you're not going to believe it, and in the future, you're going to know that I was right? Yosef never actually said that. He just told them... He told them the dreams, and then they just, they got rid of him. He never said to them explicitly, oh, you're going to know that I'm right. He didn't have a chance. Who was the one who actually said that? Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Now, Moshe Rabbeinu says, not just to Paro. If it were only to Paro, that would be not so bad. But actually, Moshe Rabbeinu in Sefer Dvarim, if you were to try to understand Yeshayahu as a commentary on any other book of the Tanakh, it's a commentary on the book of Dvarim. Almost everything in Yeshayahu is one way or another drawn from or based on Dvarim. The book of Dvarim as a whole, not the Parashat. So for example, if you take a look, and again, this is something I could give you, like I said, it's a very overwhelming book to try to give one class on. So I apologize, I'm giving you like snippets here. But if you take a look in, for example, Parashat Vayelech at the end. This is Dvarim, Lamed Aleph, Pasuk, let's say Pasuk Kafvav. Okay, this is Moshe Rabbeinu giving the Sefer Torah to the Leviim. Lakoch et Sefer Torah zeh v'samtem oto mitzad Aron berit Hashem Elohechem v'yah sham b'chal ha'ed. Take this Sefer Torah and put it next to the ark. It's going to be an ed. It's going to be. Now you learned Hilchot Edut. Can you ask a Sefer Torah to give you Edut in the Bet Din? No. What does it mean it's going to be an ed? It means the content, right? The content is going to be a testimony. Why? Because ki anochi yadati et meriecha. Because I know how bad you are, how rebellious you are. V'et orpecha kashe, and your stiff neck. Hen be'odeni chayim achem hayom mamrim heitem im Hashem. Even as I'm standing here with you today, you're already rebelling against Hashem. V'af ki acharei moti, certainly after I die, you're going to be worse. And then what does he say? he says, get together, and I'm going to have the heavens and earth testify against you, right? And what is the testimony that he's going to present them with? He's going to present them with Hazinu, the long Hazinu, the poem of Hazinu, which describes all of Jewish history, the Jewish future. And if you look back even a few psukim, you see that when he talks to Yehoshua, he says, before he even talks to the Levi'im, he says, after I die, these people are going to go after idolatry. They're going to rebel against the Brit, and my anger is going to flare up against them. I'm going to leave them. This is Pasuk Yud Zayin, and I'm going to hide my face from them, and they will be consumed. Umtsa'uhu ra'ot rabot v'tzarot, and all kinds of bad things are going to find them. Ve'amar bayomahu halo al ki'en Eloi b'kirbi mitza'oni ha'ra'ot ha'elah. They're going to say, I realize it's because God is not with me that these things have happened. Va'anochi hastir panai bayomahu al kol ha'ra asher asa ki fanai Elohim achirim. So he says, Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, I'm giving you the testimony now that you are going to stray from the Torah, and in the end, bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to meet with all kinds of terrible distress, all kinds of calamities are going to befall you, and you're going to read this, it's going to be la'ed. Just like, what does Ishayah say? L'te'udah, same word, edut. It's going to be a testimony to you in retrospect. Wow, this was all along part of the plan. I didn't see it. I couldn't see it ahead of time. But they say hindsight is 20/20. However, if you didn't have it written in the book, if you didn't have it documented, you'd say, okay, so God abandoned us, so Hashem forgot us, and then he remembered us later. It wouldn't be obvious that it was part of the plan from the outset. But the fact that it's written in the book, it's written in Hazinu, shows you that it was planned from the beginning. It shows you that the Nevuah was true. And if the Nevuah was true about this, then it's true about everything. That authenticates and validates the Nevuah. It gives us a sense of being able to rely upon the prophecy and what's written in the Torah, what's written in the Tanakh. And that's what Ishayah wanted to accomplish, and that's what he did accomplish. And if you look really, as I said, Yeshayahu is like a latter-day Moshe Rabbeinu. Not only in this respect, but in many respects. Both Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshayahu emphasize the idea that one day all the nations of the world are going to acknowledge the Jewish people as the source of wisdom. What does it say in Parashat Va'etchanan? The people will say, Rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh. This nation is such a wise and understanding nation. They have mishpatim tzadikim. They have righteous judgments and laws that are so incredible, and God is so close with them. And we see that throughout Yeshayahu. That's a theme. That one day the nations will recognize that. Moreover, Yeshayahu critiques in the beginning of Yeshayahu, in the beginning of the book, the korbanot, right? The korbanot. And it's very interesting that you'll notice that there's very little mention of the korbanot in the book of Dvarim. In fact, the Ramban says that one of the unique things about Sefer Dvarim is almost no mention of the korbanot. There's a mention of going up to the Beit HaMikdash. There's a mention of certain aspects of being allowed to have meat, for example, even in the absence of korbanot. But there's no emphasis on the laws of korbanot in Sefer Dvarim. There's an emphasis on musar, on the ideas of Torah, on the thematic and philosophical principles of Torah, not on the korbanot, not on the external rituals so much. On the love of Hashem, on the fear of Hashem, on ethics. What is the first thing in the book of Dvarim? After Moshe Rabbeinu starts his speech, he talks about shoftim. He talks about establishing justice. The first thing he talks about is, I said I can't handle it alone. So I gave you, ויקח את ראשי שבטיכם, אנשים חכמים ודועים, ויתן אותם ראשים עליכם, שרי אלפים, שרי מאות, ושרי 50 ושרי עשרות, etc. ואצווה את שופטיכם בעת ההיא לאמור, and I commanded your judges at that time, שמוע בין אחיכם ושפטתם צדק. This sounds like Ishayah. This could be a pasuk in Ishayah. I told them, judge fairly and righteously, judge the people correctly. So you see the idea that justice is at the core of the society, it's at the core of the community. That's in the book of Dvarim, and that's in the book of Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu is a latter-day Moshe Rabbeinu. They both talk about limud quite a lot also. The book of Dvarim talks about limud, it talks about learning. There's also a lot of linguistic commonalities. For instance, in Hazinu, the idea of Vayishman Yishurun Vayiv'at. The people will become fat, and they will kick. Which means when they become decadent, when there are pleasures, when they're comfortable, people are living luxuriously, they don't want to listen to Hashem. And what does it say also in Ishayah? Hashmen lev ha'am hazeh. The people's heart has become fat. The same language, the same concept. He also uses the word ha'azinu a lot. Shayahu uses the word ha'azinu several times. Almost like a literary allusion. That's a good, Doris knows about literary allusion. She's an English master's. You finished your master's, right? Mazal tov. Right, so she finished, so she knows that there's a lot of allusion to Devarim. I'll tell you another interesting one. What does Yeshayahu say to the people that he criticizes them? I know this is not my proper parak. Please forgive me. I hope you're not going to be mad at me. But in the very beginning, he says, the people say, we could have been like Saddam, right? Baruch Hashem, we were saved. But they said, Kisdom hayinu la'amorah daminu, we would have been compared to Saddam and Amorah. And what does Ishayah say to them? Shim'u devar Hashem kitzinei Saddam. Listen to the word of Hashem, princes of Saddam. Right? He says, don't say we would have been like Saddam. You are like Saddam. And ha'azinu Torat Eloheinu am Amorah. Listen to the Torah of our God, people of Amorah. He's calling them Saddam va'Amorah. That's very harsh language. He does it again, actually, in Yud Gimel. He uses the same language again. Mentioning Saddam va'Amorah in the context of Bavel in that case, in the Masa Bavel. He uses this in Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk. It's so hard to find the Pasuk, it's on the side, Yud Tet. Yeah. He says, Kemapechat Elohim et Saddam ve'et Amorah. Saddam va'Amorah, they like this theme. Does anybody know where this theme appears? It appears in... Very good guess. It is a shir, but not sure a shirim. Ha'azinu. In Ha'azinu. It appears. Because what does he say? Because he says there, Ki migefen Sodom gafnam umishadmot Amorah. This is in Lamed Bet. Lev. That's how you remember it. Ki migefen Sodom gafnam umishadmot Amorah. So you see that the theme of Sodom va'Amorah, something that Moshe Rabbeinu uses to describe how they're headed for destruction, Yeshayahu picks up on the same thing, he uses it too. So there's a definite borrowing, there's a definite taking. And you also see, just one last thing, to beg your indulgence, one last interesting thing, in Parashat Re'eh, when the idea of a true Navi, which obviously must have been a very, very great concern to Yeshayahu, because he was trying to prove the truth of Nevu'ah, when this idea is discussed, I'm sorry, not in Re'eh, that's where the bad Nevi'im are, in Shofatim, where the good Nevi'im are discussed, Parashat Shofatim, over there, it speaks about a true Navi, and in that context, what is it contrasted with? What is the true Navi contrasted with? This is in Perek Yud Chet, Pasuk Tet. It's contrasted with all of the different kinds of to'avot of a certain type, all of the different kinds of psychics, all of the different kinds of magic, all of the different kinds of superstition, all of the different kind of mediums and communicating with the dead, all of the things that Yeshayahu says in his generation, they were going to instead of him. Where does that juxtaposition, that connection is right in Parashat Shoftim, in Sefer Dvarim. It's right there. Don't go after these things. Hashem is going to give you a Navi mikirbecha me'achecha kamocha. What's the pasuk exactly? Navi mikirbecha. Navi mikirbecha me'achecha kamoni. Right. Yakim lecha Hashem Elohecha. Right. So that's the pasuk. Hashem is going to give you a Navi like me, not exactly like me, but close enough. So that's again, Yeshayahu is building on these commonalities in Sefer Dvarim. And last but not least, they both talk about Hester Panim, that Hashem at a certain time is going to hide from the Jewish people, not be revealed until later. The last theme that I wanted to emphasize here and bring out, since I was supposed to go all the way to Masab Bavel, all the way to the 13th chapter, where it starts talking about the nations of the world, is this idea of Yeshayahu's concern with what's going to happen to the nations of the world. But he starts with that concern even before Masab Bavel. He starts about it with Ashur even in advance, because he talks about how Ashur is going to become very, very arrogant after they're able to rout Malchut Yisrael, after they're able to destroy Aram, after they're able to have taken over practically the known world. At that time. They were able to become such a mighty empire. At that point, there's going to be tremendous arrogance on the part of Ashur. And Hashem says, then he's going to, this is in Perek Tet, Pasuk, Perek Yud, Pasuk Hey. that he talks about, Hoy Ashur shevet api, umatehu v'yadam zami. That Ashur is this is a famous pasuk also, the rod of my anger. He's like a stick in my hand. Ashur, the nation, is like a stick in my hand. He thinks he's very powerful, but he's really just a tool in the hand of God. However, the problem is, in pasuk zayin, Vehu lo chen yedameh, ulvavo lo chen yachshov, that Ashur might be fulfilling the mission of Hashem, but in his mind, that's not what he's doing. In his mind, what is he doing? Ki lahashmid bilvavo, ulachrit goyim lo me'at. His goal is conquer as many nations as possible for power. He's not thinking about Hashem. He's not thinking about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from him. Ki yomar, halo sarai yachdav melachim. All of my princes are kings, meaning look how powerful we are. A prince in my nation is like a king of another nation. And then he says, the worst part of all, he says, just like, this is Pasuk Yud, kasher matza'a yadi lemamlechot ha'elil, like my hand was able to conquer the kingdoms of idolatry, ufsilehem mirushalayim u'mishomeron. It's going to be the same from Jerusalem and Shomron. Halo kasher asiti l'shomron ve'le'elileha, ken e'aseh li'Yerushalayim ve'la'atzabeha. Just like I did to the gods of Shomron, which were idolatrous gods, because that was Malchut Yisrael, I'm going to do to the idols of the Jewish people of Yehudah. Now the nation of Yehudah, Malchut Yehudah, didn't worship idolatry by the time Ashur got there. We're talking about the time of Chizkiyahu. By the time Ashur was facing Malchut Yisrael and Malchut Yehudah, Yehudah was not worshiping idolatry. That was the time of Chizkiyahu. So if God forbid he should come and think that even if Yehudah deserves it, in other words, even if Yehudah deserves to be punished by Ashur, Hashem won't let it happen. Why? Because Ashur is going to say, why did this happen? It happened because the God of Israel is nothing. He's just like the other gods. And just as I was able to conquer them, I can conquer the God of Israel. And this is a principle that we find throughout the Tanakh, that Hashem is concerned about Shemo HaGadol. He's concerned about his great name. He doesn't want Chilul Hashem, desecration of his name, to happen in the world. And this is the reason why, even in the times, if you look throughout Jewish history, every salvation, see, it's human nature to think of salvation in terms of ourselves, okay? To think of success in terms of our achievement, and to think of salvation from trouble in terms of ourselves. We're very happy Hashem stepped in and saved us from trouble. But we don't focus on why did he do it. We don't focus on the reason behind him doing it. Okay? And Hashem always tries to make clear, even when he took us out of bondage in Mitzrayim, he takes us out in a way that shows that we are coming out of Egypt in order to be devoted to the service of Hashem. It's all for the sake of his name. It's not because we're so important. And if Hashem brings nations upon us to punish us, it's not because those nations are very important and they deserve to be able to rule the world. It's because Hashem is allowing them for some ultimate purpose to do that temporarily. But if they start to believe in their own legend, believe in their own myth, then it defeats the whole purpose. What did Moshe Rabbeinu say? Don't destroy the Jews for Egel HaZahav. If you do that, what will the people say? They'll say Hashem couldn't bring them into Eretz Yisrael. That's why he slaughtered them in the Midbar. He didn't say because the Jews are really good, feel bad for them, they don't deserve it. No. He said, if you destroy them, either in the case in Egel HaZahav or in Chet HaMeraglim, both times, if you destroy them, the nations of the world are going to say, you did it because you couldn't bring them in. It's going to be Chilul Hashem. We don't want that to happen. And so you see here as well, Ishayah is saying, Hashem allows Ashur to go only so far. But since he's going to have the wrong idea, since the nation of Ashur is going to feel itself entitled and is going to see an equation between the idols and Hashem, therefore they can't be allowed to visit any punishment on Malchut Yehudah. In fact, the army of Ashur perishes in a miraculous way, as we know from the story of Chizkiyahu. It's really a miraculous way. So that's something that shows the hand of God in history, the hand of God operating, and that it wasn't about Ashur. It wasn't about them rising to the top. It was about a bigger plan than they realized. Now, this too, by the way, is in Parashat Hazinu. Because what does it say in Parashat Hazinu? In Hazinu, going all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, he says that all of these nations are going to come, and they're going to pounce on you, and they're going to exile you, and they're going to make you suffer. But the only thing is, at a certain point, Hashem says, after I've subjected you to enough suffering, then he says, Amarti af'ehem, Then he says, I'm going to destroy Ashbita me'enosh zechram. Lulei kas oyev agur. If it were not for the anger of the enemy that's built up, pen yenakeru tzaremo, pen yomeru yadenu rama, velo Hashem pa'al kol zot. I have to then punish those who punished you. Why? Because they're going to say they did it. They're going to think they were the ones who did it. They're not going to see the divine plan behind what they did. And so this is the principle throughout Jewish history, that even when Hashem allows the nations of the world to cause us some suffering, to cause us some pain, to put us in a difficult position, at the end of the day, lema'an shemo, that's what we always ask Hashem, lema'an shemo bi'ahava, for the sake of His name He should save us. Meaning, even when we're not deserving, don't allow the nations of the world to believe we've been defeated. And I think that that's so true. You can see it even in modern history, that at the worst time, at the lowest time, the beginning of the 20th century, when really all of the the Christians of the world and whoever were looking and saying, see, we told you the Jews are rejected, the Jews are abhorred by God, and God has nothing to do with them, and He's cast them aside in favor of the church, or whatever kind of shtuyot that they said. And what happened right after that? The return to Israel. Hashem is saying, not so fast. Not so fast. The story is not over. And you see this, Moshe Rabbeinu predicted this in Hazinu, that we should always have Hazinu with us to remember that even at the darkest times, this is part of the plan. We're not abandoned, we're not lost. Ishayah said, keep this Torah with you and know that even when times are dark, Hashem hasn't abandoned you, and ultimately Ashur will also fall. All of these kingdoms will fall because Hashem is the only true king, the only one who's really running things. And today as well, we should keep in mind that even at the darkest and most difficult times, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a much bigger plan than what we can perceive. We only see the tip of the iceberg, and that ultimately He will restore us to where we belong, as all of these beautiful nivuot, all these beautiful prophecies that we read in Ishayah. He always does that. He brings you to the lowest, the terrible prophecies about destruction, and then He talks about Mashiach and all of the beautiful things that are going to happen in the future, and what the future holds in store for us that's positive and that's inspiring. So we should never lose sight of the inspiring end of the story that we yearn to one day see as well. Thank you very much, everybody.